Welcome back. So in this video I'm going to give you a quick overview of what Unity is and cover some of the key concepts in the engine. So what is Unity? It's a gaming engine and game development environment. It allows you to build pretty sophisticated AAA style games, as you can see kind of going on in the background here. And it provides a easy to use development environment, which makes it very, very easy to build out and design games. So it provides all sorts of interesting tools like performance analysis tools and monitoring tools. A nice development environment, very easy to use, lots of point and click and drag and stuff. We'll get into that in a little while. Now, whilst it's designed and built as a 3D engine, it's also quite capable of creating 2D games, and that's what we're going to use for this tutorial series that we're going through at the moment. One of the very cool things about Unity is its multi-platform support. So pretty much with very little effort you can write a single game and deploy it to all of these platforms. Your app platforms are iOS and Android, Windows Phone as well, Tenzing as well, Windows App Stores for your Macs, WebGL so that it plays directly in the browser, and if you have appropriate developer kits you can do things like Xbox One, Xbox 360, PlayStation, and other things like that, and the Universal Windows platform, Windows Store apps as well. So from that point of view it's great. Because you can pretty much write your code once, do very minimal platform specific development, and then publish out to a variety of platforms. The other cool thing about Unity is that it's pretty much free unless you're making more than $100,000 a year. So if you look at the end user license agreement, pretty much if you're a commercial entity that makes more than $100,000 US a year, then you need to purchase a license. Otherwise, if your annual budget, you've got to do that. Or if you're an individual or sole proprietor, then there's $100,000 there as well, which does not include income earned that is unrelated to the use of Unity software. So if you're an indie dev or a hobbyist, it is a great platform to work with, because by the time you're making $100,000 US, you can actually easily afford the platform. Now, one of the things that Unity comes in is the personal edition, which is effectively the free edition, and the professional edition. In earlier versions of Unity, there used to be a distinct difference in the engine features. That's all gone away. The personal and the professional editions are pretty much identical in terms of capability. What you really get with the professional edition, apart from meeting the licensing restrictions, is things like being able to customize the splash screen, get access to the cloud build server, team licensing, bug handling, and a bunch of access to a lot of their other features, like their services, where they provide things like ads and analytics and performance reporting and those other kinds of services. If you do need to buy Unity, the professional edition, you can pretty much pay about $75 a month, or you can do a one-off purchase, and then there's some additional charges for buying the app add-ons. But once again, that's only comes into effect if you making more than $100,000 a year from the games. Because of this, its multi-platform support, the Unity has a really good community. So there is heaps and heaps of questions and answers, example code, and the like. And it also has a very cool asset store where you can purchase all sorts of add-ons. A lot of them are for free, but there's also a lot of high quality assets, code, scripts, plugins, all sorts of things that make development a lot easier as well. So that's pretty much the background for Unity itself. So what we'll do now is we'll jump in and I will show you it in action. So what I've done here is I've started up Unity in the background, and we're going to click on New to create a new project. And it's going to ask me for my project's name. I'm just going to put it into my temp folder, and I'm going to call it demo project. Now you'll see there's a flag here. You can either run Unity in 3D mode or in 2D mode. It's the same engine and stuff. All that option there does is it changes some of the default settings in the editor. For this video, I'm going to leave it in 3D mode, and I'm going to show you most of the 3D features, but they are all applicable to the 2D engine as well. So I'm just going to click on Create Project. And we'll give that a moment to set up the project. And I'm going to ignore, it does an auto update as well, but I'm going to currently ignore this version. So this is the Unity development interface. It's pretty customizable. Most things you can click and drag and dock windows in a variety of places just by doing that kind of stuff. There's also some pre-canned layouts. So depending on the mode you like to work on or what you're currently doing at the time, you can change that around. So I normally do the full split view for my 3D games. So there's a number of different panels. So the first thing to notice is that I am currently in a project. Here's my project panel, which lists out all the assets and items in my project, which is currently nothing. And the second thing to notice is that Unity basically works on a scene. So a scene is effectively a title screen or one game level, or effectively one thing that's running at a time. And you'll see that if I hit the file menu, I can save my current scene or create a brand new scene. And so what we're looking at here is the default scene. The most important panel, or the most commonly used panel, is this hierarchy panel, and this actually shows you all the items that are in your scene. So at the moment we have a main camera, which is this item here, and I'm currently looking in the top, front, right hand and perspective views at the moment, which is what my 4-split layout does for me. And then we also have the other object in the scene is a directional light. You want to notice is that as I'm selecting items on the side here, the inspector panel is changing, and this is where I can set all the properties and the values, or adjust the components or add components to these things in the hierarchy. Now in Unity, most of these things in the hierarchy are descendants of or types of game objects. So you'll notice, for instance, the main camera has a transform component, as does the directional light, and often you can add other components to these game objects, and I'll cover that in a little while. Then the other important bit is this play, pause, and buttons across the top there. So if we hit the play button, it will play the current scene, and give it a moment to get going, and it will play our current scene for us. And you'll see we've now opened up this little game tab, and we can see the game being played here. And since we only have a camera and a light, there's not much going on there. One of the interesting things in here is this maximize on play button, so I normally leave that turned on. So if we unplay and play again, it will then maximize the game window, so you can play in there. There's a couple of other things on the side here. Stats, for instance, is quite useful. It gives you some details about CPU usage and frame rates and that kind of information. And then the other one that's very useful is an aspect ratio here. So this, for instance, lets you adjust the screen size and see how your game behaves on different aspect ratios and screen sizes, which is important when you're having to make adjustments or test your game on different aspect ratios or on different screen resolutions based on handheld mobile devices. So for instance, I'll put it at 16:9 resolution there. Now, obviously, there's not much going on in that scene, so it's kind of boring. So really let's add some other items in here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go up to the game object menu, and this lists out all the various types of objects we can add. And since we are doing a 3D object here, I'm going to 3D mode, I'm going to add a 3D object, and I'm going to add a cube. And you'll see that it's placed a cube on my scene and named the cube over there. And once again, we can see its positioning and default scaling. So we can, we could adjust it potentially if I wanted to make it scale it that way, or put it back to 1. You also can manipulate it with these manipulators. So I could drag it around. I could spin it as well, and I could scale it as well. So I'll just scale it like something like that. Right. So now if we run, you will see that we have a cube sitting there. So it's not particularly exciting. So what we're going to do is we're going to give this cube some color, and the way we're going to do that is to create a material. You'll see at the moment it's got a default material with nothing on it, which is just this plain white. So what we're going to do is in our assets area, we can right click and we hit the create menu, and we're going to say we want to create a new material. We're going to call it red material, and that opens up this material editor for us. Now Unity comes with a standard 3D shader, which they call a physically based rendering shader, PBR type shader, and it's quite sophisticated. It allows you to do all sorts of colors and metallic looks and shading and normal maps and bumps and detail masks and even emission to make it glow and all sorts of things. We're just going to keep it real simple here, and we're just going to effectively use the albedo and change it to a nice red color. Right, so we've got our red material over there. So if we go back to our cube, we can now take this red material and drag it onto our cube, and we now have a nice red cube, and you'll see the light is starting to shade it as well. So if I press play now, we have our red cube sitting in space. Cool. So what we're going to do now is give it a bit of life, and in Unity you can add all sorts of things to your game objects by adding components. And what we're going to do here is we're going to add a script component, and what we're going to do is set the script component to make the cube spin around. So we click add component, and we're going to go down to new script, and we are going to call this script spin. Now one thing to note here is that we have a variety of different languages that we could use. I'm going to use C#, but you can also use JavaScript. I tend to use C# because it allows for much cleaner and more obvious scripting, and most examples you see on the web there are C# examples as well. But if you do know JavaScript, it can be useful to do your coding in JavaScript, but I prefer C#. So we're going to click on the spin, and then we're going to say create and add. And so we see now we've got a new component added called the spin script, and you can use this little dialog here to remove it or copy this component if you want to. So what we're going to do now is double click to edit that script. Now when you install Unity 5.2 or higher, it will be using Visual Studio as its development environment. So we're just going to give that a moment to start up in the background. And then we will be editing this script that you'll see that Unity's created a skeleton class called spin for us. Just give it a moment more. So whilst that's running, I'll talk about this. So you'll see that it's created a default class called spin. It extends mono behavior, so most scripting components that you add to a game object implement mono behavior, and mono behavior basically means it implements a couple of standard methods that get called by the Unity game engine at particular points in time, and it's also put in a dummy methods for us, or empty methods for us. So we have the start method, and this pretty much gets called when the game object is created in the scene. So we can kind of put any kind of initialization code we want in there. And then we have the update method. Pretty much this method will be called once per frame update. So we can put any kind of logic in there that we want to trigger every frame update. So in this case, we want to make the cube spin. So what we're going to say is we want to use the transform, which was that standard location, rotation, and scale of the game object, and we want to call a rotate method on it. And so we want to rotate it by a value or an amount, and the thing we're going to rotate about is a vector3.up, and we're going to multiply that by time.delta time times 90. All right. So I'll just explain what this is actually doing. So the transform rotate is going to rotate the object around, and what we need to do is tell it how much and in which directions we want to rotate. So vector up is a 3D vector, and if we quickly look back in Unity here, you'll see that when we select an object to say move it around, let me select the cube, we have these arrows, but more importantly these arrows here, which is the X, Y, and if you're looking into the screen, the Z plus and minus Z directions. So a vector up is a mathematical construct that's representing a line pointing up into space, more or less up along the y-axis. And so what we're doing in this piece of code is we're saying we want to rotate the vector up. So if you imagine we're starting with a line pointing straight up, and we want to rotate that by 90 degrees. So it's going to basically rotate 90 degrees. Now if we did this every frame, if we updated it by 90 degrees every frame, it would spin particularly fast. So what we really want to do is rotate it 90 degrees once every second. Unity provides this helpful time class, which pretty much lets you query the game engine's clock. And the delta time is pretty much a fractional number of how much time has passed since the last frame. Time measures everything in seconds, so this will be a fraction of a second. So what we're really saying here is that if we want to rotate 90 degrees in 1 second, every frame we want to rotate around the up vector the amount of time that the last frame took as a fraction of a second by 90 degrees. So once we've made this there, we can just hit save, and then when you toggle back to Unity, Unity will compile the script for you. You'll see there's some messages at the bottom here. If you double click that, that will bring up the console. So this can be quite important. So if I go back to there and I say delete this and I hit save, when I toggle back, you see Unity will complain that it wasn't able to compile the code. So I'll just toggle back to that and put that back. All right, and hopefully the errors will go away, yes, once it's compiled. So we can close that off. And once again, if you want, for instance, you could dock that window somewhere if you really wanted to as well. All right, so we've now got our spin component attached to our cube. So now if we hit the play button, you'll see that the cube is now slowly spinning, or at least spinning 90 degrees around the up vector every second. So the beauty of Unity is that all these things that you create are kind of reusable. So for instance, if I add another game object here, and I'm going to add a 3D object, and I'm going to add a cylinder, I'll just drag it out to the side here, over there somewhere. I can now take that cylinder and I could also drop the spin script onto it. So if I was to run that now, you can't quite see it because I haven't rotated it, but the cube is actually rotating there. Let me just give it a bit of rotation so it's a bit more obvious that the cylinder is actually rotating. Yeah, well, you can see it's rotating there and spinning around. Cool. So it's really great for in Unity to create components that you can then reuse, and it affects the way you put things together, so that you get a lot of reuse out of your scripts and out of your game objects. The other thing that Unity lets you do is effectively turn an existing game object into a prefab, which then lets you make multiple copies of it, and also lets you then, if you edit the details of a prefab, it applies to all the instances. So for instance, to create a prefab, you select an existing object in your hierarchy and you drag it into your project, and you'll see it's now become a cube, and you see this has gone slightly blue. And for instance, if I wanted another one of those, I could drag it in there, and I could now drag that second instance around, and maybe I grab a third one and I put it over there. Oh, and back over there. Now what you'll see is that anything where the cube has differed from the prefab will be marked in dark, but everything else will not be in bold. So we can see that those cubes, because I've positioned them slightly differently, their location and rotation is in bold. Now if I go and select the cube over here, and I for instance say that actually I want the default to be 1 again, you'll see that all 3 cubes changed, because I'm editing the prefab. So I could make this a 2. However, if I go to a cube 1 over here, for instance, I can actually go and say, actually I want to override the prefab settings and make that a 1 again. And of course, because all these cubes have the red material, they're all red, and they also have the spin script, so they should all be spinning. So if I hit that, we can see them all spinning now. Now Unity provides heaps and heaps of other sophisticated built-in mechanisms. If you look carefully under the game objects, you'll see that, as well as being able to add objects and of course import 3D models from other environments, we've got things like ragdolls, terrain effects, we've got wind, we've got particle systems, there's an entire user interface system, a bunch of audio systems, lots of lighting systems, the 2D stuff that we'll look at in the future. We also have a bunch of components, special effects, lens flares, halos, projectors, a whole physics engine, navigation mechanisms for creating path and agents to move around the scene, and a range of other and networking things as well. So there's a lot of stuff there. So what I'm going to do now, just before we kind of wrap up here, is I'm going to create a new scene, or let me just save the scene here so you get a feel for that. So if I save a scene, we will see that we'll call this spinning scene. You can see it saves as a spinning scene, and you also see that that scene now becomes an asset or an object within my project. So I'll just go and create a new scene. It's an empty scene, and what we're going to do here is I'm going to do a little bit of playing around with the physics engine. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to add a plane, just for something to sit on, and in that plane I am going to add a cube. I'll just pull that cube up slightly so that it's sitting on the plane. Now that we've got a plane there, you can see the directional light causing it to cast a shadow, which is pretty cool. Then I'm going to game object, I will create a sphere, and I'll drag that sphere up, and I will also drag it across to the side slightly. And what we're going to do with the sphere, because we want to turn this into a ball that falls out of the sky, is we're going to add a component to it, and we're going to go to the physics component, and we're going to add a rigid body to it. And that pretty much adds this section over here, which lets us control its mass and gravity and all sorts of things, angular drag, and whether it's affected by gravity and a bunch of other things like that. So hopefully if we press play now, we should see the ball fall. Now you'll notice that looks vaguely unrealistic, and that's because we haven't really given the ball any kind of physics behavior. So it basically hit the thing and stopped. I'll just push it to the side slightly so that when it hits, it falls off the side there. We just minimize that, right? So we can see it, the balls in all the views. So if I press play now, we can see it do its thing there and fall off the edge. So let's, one ball is kind of boring, so let's do something more there. Firstly, let's make the ball a red ball, and then we're going to turn the sphere, which I'm going to rename ball. I'm going to take that ball and make it a prefab, and then I'm going to add a couple more of them and position them in a variety of places. Higher up there, 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 and there. And so if we press play now, we'll have some balls falling. Also, just for interest, let's take this cube we have here and we'll throw our spin script on it. If we press play now, we should have a spinning cube which might knock the balls around a bit. So it's all pretty slow. And so then the last thing we need to do is actually give these balls a bit of bounce. So what you would have noticed that if we select the ball, that in the sphere collider we can give it a physics material, which is basically affects the way the ball behaves from a physics point of view. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click here, we're going to go to create physics material, and we're going to call it bouncy, and in there we're going to literally just crank up the bounciness here to 1. Let's see what that looks like. Well, firstly we go back to the ball and we take our bouncy material and we put it on there. Now rather than drag and drop, one of the other things you can do in Unity is there's a little icon next to a lot of these things like this. If you click on that, it will bring up a search box which lets you search all your current assets to find the thing you want, filtered by the type of object you want. So it's quite useful when you have lots and lots of things in your project. So we've added the bouncy material to our ball prefab, which means that all the various balls that we have in the scene will get that bouncy material. So if we hit play now, there we are, we've made the balls a bit bouncier. And we could of course go and adjust that to something crazy, which is probably going to make them bounce like nuts, but let's have a look. Oh, that was only a minimal change. Oh, I didn't save it, that's why. Got to tab out of the... Oh, 1's the maximum bouncy. Alright, fair enough. So yes, there's other things you can adjust in there as well. Friction, their effect by gravity, their mass. So we could go to the ball and say actually the ball is a lot heavier. And run that. And we'll see a slightly different behavior compared to, say, if we made the balls a lot lighter or increased their angular drag, for instance. Alright, well that about does it for this tutorial. The next one we'll start actually working on the game that we intend to make, the 2D Run Bunny Run game. So until next time, please like this video if you liked it, add any comments if I've missed anything or anything wasn't particularly clear, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Cheers.